All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February Wisconsin Coalition for Social Connection Network meeting. My name is Erin Eggert, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Wisconsin Institute for Healthy Aging. Suzanne Morley normally runs these meetings, but I have stepped in today as she is facilitating a workshop. Thanks again for everyone for joining us today and for being here. We have a lot of exciting things on our agenda. So we'll start off with an icebreaker, and then we'll go into some screening and intervention evaluation, just a little bit more information about that. Then we have a guest with us today, Deely Calvert from UW-Madison Division of Extension. So she'll talk a little bit about storytelling, and then we'll do some announcements and wrap up. So our icebreaker today, I'm not sure where everyone is located, but wherever you are, how chilly it is. Today, we would like to talk about one of your favorite things to do in the cold. So if you can just type that in the chat, your name, where you're from, or your organization, and your favorite thing to do in the cold. So Michelle says, snuggle up with a blanket and tea and a book. That sounds great. Lisa Bittman from ADRC of Waukesha County, read by the fireplace. That's a great one. Be cozy inside, stay inside. Wonderful. Watch movies. There's a lot of stay inside. That's especially for this cold temperature. That makes sense. Snuggle with my kitties. Cross country skiing. Great. We got a little bit of outdoorsy there. Be cozy inside, watch movies on a couch with a blanket and lots of candles, glass of wine and a good book in front of a fireplace. Snowshoe, but not when it's this cold. Wonderful. Bake, ooh, great. Sledding with the kids, hot tea, light a fire, lots of fireplaces, snuggling. Watch my son play hockey, hiking, downhill skiing, stay inside and drink hot coffee, snowshoeing and snowmobiling, hiking, watching movies, going nowhere. Great. Wonderful. If you're just coming in, our icebreaker today is your favorite thing to do in the cold. If you can type your name, where you're from, and your favorite thing to do in the cold in the chat, that would be great. And then we'll go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about screening and evaluation and differentiating between those two things, and kind of talking a little bit about the resources that the Wisconsin Coalition for Social Connection provides to you and where you can find some additional resources. So screening is used to identify whether a person is lonely or isolated at one point in time. If the person is identified as being lonely or isolated, there must be some follow-up to be able to assist that person. So we don't want to just identify them as, oh, this person's lonely, and then not have a process in place for a follow-up or to help provide them some additional resources or support. An article from the Journal of American Medical Association states that screening for any condition in isolation without the capacity to ensure referral and linkage to appropriate treatment is ineffective and arguably unethical. So just kind of pointing to the need or importance of having that follow-up process in place if you are doing screening, to make sure that you have some resources to refer to. Intervention evaluation is to identify whether an intervention, like a program, a workshop, or a different kind of class, impacts a participant's loneliness or isolation or social connection over time. So usually that's done with a pre and a post survey and kind of looks at the differences of this person stated they were or ranked at this point at pre, and then they ranked at this point in post, and whether that changed over time. So this evaluation really considers careful consideration when you're testing to get useful pre and post results. And you want to think about what you really want to know when you're developing those survey questions. You want to avoid leading and biased questions and keep it short and simple. Another option is to use a validated evaluation, which has already been researched and tested to help ensure that that works. So just a little bit more information about screening. There are several screening tools available for loneliness and social isolation. Some of those include the UCLA three-item loneliness scale, the Lubin social network scale, the De Jong-Gierveld loneliness scale, the USERS, and some others. So the Wisconsin Coalition for Social Connection really promotes the UCLA three-item loneliness scale. So we'll go into depth a little bit more about that one. So this tool is used for screening an individual for loneliness, and you can use this tool itself, or you can take these questions and add it to a different type of screening that you might be doing. So it's these three questions. How often do you feel a lack of companionship? And somebody will respond either hardly ever, some of the time, or often. How often do you feel left out? And how often do you feel isolated from others? Based on the responses, they will receive scoring, so they can be identified as somebody who is not lonely if they score between a 3 and a 5, and they can be identified as somebody who is lonely if they score between a 6 and a 9. So each response of those three questions can be scored either a 1, 2, or 3, and then those scores are totaled to get that total score. So that will help to rank people from the least lonely to the most lonely. And then, as we kind of talked about, especially when important when we're talking about that social or that screening, we want to make sure that we have a process in place. So the Wisconsin Coalition for Social Connection identified this process or developed this process and kind of as a guide to help organizations or different communities know what to do to follow up with that. So if somebody identifies with a score of 3 to 5 as not lonely, then you're going to look at, you may talk to that individual about what is happening that is contributing to their score. So finding those positives in there. Are there any areas of their life that they would like to explore further to help increase or maintain those social connections? And then some other resources that you could use include the Wisconsin Guide to Social Connection, the local health promotion programming support, or different referrals from there, offering different volunteer opportunities, and then even the ADRCs or other local newsletters. If somebody does identify within that 6 to 9 range or as lonely, then you might want to ask them, what does a day or week of feeling more connected look like for them? So what happens in that time to help people feel more connected, and whether they can tell you about a time that made them feel more connected. Resources that we have available for that include the Stay Connected Guide. You might provide a referral to a community health worker if that seems appropriate. You can assist with setting up appropriate referrals or follow-ups to other community-based organizations or other resources in your community. And then you can provide follow-up if that's needed. And then in some circumstances, that might include the suicide protocol is activated as well. So just making sure that we have those follow-up steps in place. We do have a toolkit on the website, so that includes the background, the purpose, and why the Wisconsin Coalition of Social Connection selected the UCLA tool specifically. You can find more information about that on our website under the measurement resources, and we are going to take a look at that page specifically a little bit too. So the screening tools on there, again, it just shows that the Wisconsin Coalition for Social Connection really promotes the use of that UCLA three-item tool, just because it seems to be the tool that when we looked at all of the available tools, it was the most easily implemented, and we had the best protocol or follow-up in place with that too. So switching to evaluation. Intervention evaluation tools, there are also many of those available. To evaluate an intervention is to determine whether the intervention helps to reduce isolation or loneliness or increase social connection. So there might be many factors that can contribute to identifying the best tool for your organization. So, of all of the tools that are available, some of those factors might include length, the validity of the tool, the cost, or some other things may impact your decision as well. The Foundation for Social Connection has a social connection measurement tool inventory, and we will take a brief look at that as well. But that includes over 50 measurement tools that you can filter through depending on your needs. So, we at the Coalition really promote the use of that to help you identify a tool that is best suited for the program that you're looking at, what the considering all the factors that impact your organization and the programs that you offer to help identify the best fit tool for you. So just a reminder that screening is not the same as evaluation. And we actually have talked to the developers of the UCLA 3-item tool, and they have shared with us that you should not use the UCLA 3-item tool for evaluation. So that means don't put that into a pre-post type of survey. It is not to be used to evaluate a program. And the reason for that is it has not been shown to be effective at showing improvements. So despite additional research that those researchers have done that show that an intervention may be beneficial for social connection or to reduce loneliness or isolation, the UCLA 3-item tool does not reflect that individually, so they have shared that that tool specifically should just be used for screening and not evaluation. Okay, so evaluation can also be other things, like what you're learning, what conditions were in place that helped or hindered your efforts, and then other ripples that you noticed too. So, in terms of what you're learning, so that might be changes you have made along the way for increased engagement, ease of access, or other impacts that you might see. What conditions were in place that helped or hindered your efforts, like existing relationships, champions with energy or decision-making power, or process barriers or accommodations that might be made. And then when we're thinking about ripples, thinking about what had happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So those ripples that have stemmed from that impact. All right, so I'm just going to share our website here and kind of walk through this page. You come to our website and you go over the For Professionals drop down. We have this newer page called Measurement Resources. So I'm on that page now. And if you scroll down here, you can see we kind of go through the definitions of screening and intervention evaluation here. And then we have these two drop downs. So one is the screening tool. We link a few different screening tools here, so you can find information about those. And then down below, we say the Wisconsin Coalition for Social Connection encourages the use of the 3-item tool. We provide an overview of our use with the tool and some instructions for the tool. And then we link the tool itself as well. And again, you can incorporate those questions into other screenings you may do, or you can use the tool itself. We also have a button for sharing your results. So if you are screening within your community, we'd love for you to share the information. It doesn't have to be or shouldn't be individual, but like a report that you have or any kind of summarizing data so that we can kind of get a statewide view of how that screening is going and what results you are seeing across the state. We also have the intervention evaluation tools here. So as I mentioned, we linked social connection measurement tools inventory. So when I click on that, it'll be brought to this page. So this is from the Foundation for Social Connection. And if you scroll down here, it provides some information about how to use this tool. And then it has the actual inventory. So as you can see, there's over 50 different tools here that can be used for intervention evaluation, and they have different columns that will help you identify a tool that will be suitable for you. They link to the tools, they have different areas of measurement listed, so whether that's social connection or isolation or loneliness, they have different methods of measurement, the intended administrators, what subjects are covered, target demographic, and more. So you can come in here and you can filter this and find a tool that would be really the best tool, or a few different tools that would be great for what you're looking for your different project or program or initiative. And then at the bottom of the screen, also for the evaluation, we have the share your screening or evaluation. So again, if you're doing any type of screening or evaluation in your community, we'd love for you to share the results for that. The summary results is fine. If you're already developing any kind of report for a board of directors or for a county board or anything like that, you can simply just upload that. And that would really help us to get a statewide perspective of what is happening or what we're seeing in terms of screening and evaluation results. I'll pause here for questions. Give me a second to pull up the chat. All right, so it looks like there's one question on the UCLA loneliness scale and how that is linking to isolation. So that tool is a loneliness tool. So it's not necessarily linked to isolation. There are tools that I will identify or evaluate or screen for isolation or loneliness. And this one really specifically targets the loneliness aspect. And Becca shared that they used the tool and offered a peer support or a senior center volunteer for follow-up for those who scored between a 6 and a 9. So that's a great way to provide that follow-up if somebody is identifying as lonely. I'll give just another minute for questions, and then we're going to turn it over to Dealey. All right, so there's a question about what is an isolation tool to recommend. So I'd encourage you to check out that measurement page on our website, and there's a few different tools listed there under screening. Or if you're looking for measure the intervention evaluation in terms of isolation, then checking out that coalition or the connection page that's linked underneath that intervention. All right, so I'm going to stop my screen share here and we'll turn it over to Dealey, who's going to talk to us about storytelling today.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. We'll see what happens. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, it worked. Yay. Great. Okay, so what I'm gonna take what Erin just discussed in evaluation, and I'm gonna explain how I would use that in storytelling. But before I get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about my role at Extension. I am the communications manager for the Office of Communications and Stakeholder Engagement, and at UW-Madison in the Division of Extension. And so what my main role is external communications and helping people, especially our stakeholders, understand the role or the value of the programs that we're doing at Extension. So a lot of the things we do are like building capacity. They're training people how to use assessment tools. They're things that are hard to talk about. And so a lot of our partners don't necessarily understand what we do. And so that is my job, is to use storytelling to kind of give them a picture of how that looks in the real world. So Sarah Ritchie is who I work with directly. That's on your coalition. And then Erin both asked if I would talk a little bit about our process. So I'm just going to walk through what we do. Hopefully some of it will be helpful. Not all of it will, but we'll see. And feel free to ask questions as we go. All right. So I think that when it comes to storytelling, so right now storytelling is a huge buzz right in the communications world. Everyone talks about storytelling. So maybe just think about, reflect a little bit on what it means to you. Yeah, we're gonna use it as a tool here, but storytelling can mean a lot of things. So I'm gonna really define how I'm thinking about it for you so that we're on the same page. But when think about when you talk about your work, when that is and how you talk about it. So anytime you're talking about what you do, it's a chance for you to tell a story about your work. So that could be introducing yourself at a meeting. It could be talking to your family about how your day went. It could be at a presentation. It can be all kinds of ways. So there's always a chance to talk about your work in terms of telling the story about what you do. And why stories? So the reason stories are such a buzzword right now is because they are very powerful. Humans tend to think in stories. So even if you are given facts, you are probably in your head figuring out how to put those facts together into a story because our brain really processes things through story. And so what we found is that stories are much more memorable than facts alone. And so if you can take facts and put it into a story and tell that story, the people are going to remember the facts better than if you just tell them the facts by themselves, which is a little counterintuitive because stories can be like drawn out with lots of flair, and a fact can be like, 5 people did this, but they're going to remember the story that took 5 minutes to tell versus the 5 people did this, more likely to remember. In fact, some studies show that stories can be up to 22 times more easier to remember or more likely to be remembered. So it's a pretty staggering difference. It is our brains, like I said, work in stories. So it's more efficient to tell a story than explain data. So when you're telling the story, the people can process it a lot faster. And so that actually improves what they remember and what they learn from the story because it's easier for their brain to process the information. And so another thing that you might want to think about is a story would help engage a non-expert audience. And so for me personally, I'm a lot of times talking about soil phosphorus testing on a farm and why that matters. And a non-normal person maybe doesn't care or doesn't understand what's going on. And so by telling stories about what that looks like, it helps the person who's maybe never planted crops on a farm. It helps them visualize, oh, that's what we're talking about. So it can really help. It can be a tool for just using plain language and helping people understand what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. And then it can also build trust between the storyteller and your audience. So there's something about a story that people just tend to feel more comfortable with what you're talking about. And then for better or worse, people are more likely to believe a story than facts. I'll just leave that there. And then also it's you're more likely to develop empathy and identify with your topic if you're talking in stories. For whatever reason, that is the case. So yeah, so that's why we do stories, because they're very powerful and it helps people understand the work that you're doing. And then allows for reflection with decreased defensiveness. So that is a situation where you may have facts to share, but by telling a story, people are going to be just less defensive and be able to hear what you're talking about better. So then if we talk about using stories, some stories are great when you have big ideas to explain that are maybe amorphous or just hard to get your head around. And so things like building your brand, brand is a very kind of big idea. And so stories can help you get that across easier. If you're developing your reputation as an expert in an area, believe it or not, you knowing all the things is probably less going to build or develop your reputation than you telling stories about you knowing the things. So explaining your mission, this one seems pretty obvious. If your organization has a mission and you tell stories about how you're accomplishing that, that's a really great way to use stories. And then there's just a lot of ways to tell stories. So a lot of people think personal narrative and they think about someone getting up on a stage and being very expressive and telling these awesome stories. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking more about explaining the evaluation information that you're getting. You can think about press releases. That's an opportunity to tell a story. You're going to include all the facts, but you can also kind of add in a story about someone who's gone through your program. And so that can help people read that news in a different way. But today we're going to focus on very specifically impact storytelling. And so before we have that conversation, I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't know, this is probably not the best place in this presentation to talk about it, but ethical storytelling. I think about this a lot because I think that it's easy to, because stories have so much power, it's really easy um, to use that power unethically, I guess. But you can, so there's different things to think about when you decide you're going to do storytelling that you just might want to think through. So, there's always the potential to be dramatic in storytelling, to make a point, and that can be fine. It could also maybe be a little sketchy for when you're telling your story. If you're making a point and adding more drama to it to convince someone of your point. Um, there's also you could always misuse your participant's experience. So if your participant has shared with you what their experience was, and then you're like, but I really want that outcome to match this, not this, then, that would be probably unethical. The person that you're talking about may not be comfortable with what you're saying that they did. So I usually try to really think about that. And when I do stories, I usually have the people read the article to say, did I capture what you were saying correctly? Is that the vibe that you were going for when you talked about your experience? In case they were like, that's not really, no. I've never had someone say no, but if they did, I would, want to know more about that. Um, and then it's easy to take things out of context. So if someone has a quote that sounds really good and it makes a different point, it would be easy to just use that quote to make your point. But hopefully we all know that that's maybe, like I said, a little sketchy. So, and then another piece of that is just quotes and images and how you're using those. So for me, at Extension, when I'm using quotes, I do not try not to change the quote. Sometimes I'll clean it up in terms of I'll take out ums and likes, things that are really obvious that the person would take out if they were reading the quote. But if I have any question, I leave it in, and then I always show them the quotes so that they can clean them up themselves. So sometimes you read them and you're like, that's not how they would say it if they wrote it. I leave it and let them do it because I feel like it's a little maybe paternalistic to say, hi, this was your quote, but this is what I know what you meant to say, and to change what they were saying. So I try to leave it in their voice and let them make changes if they want. So it takes a little more time because you have to allow time for everyone to review the article and make changes. But I think it's maybe a little more respectful of the voices in your story. So let's talk about impact stories. Okay. So Erin just talked about intervention evaluation. So what we're going to talk about is if you were to do an intervention and you were doing an evaluation on it, we're going to talk through how you could use a story to discuss the results of that evaluation. So the first thing is you have to understand is that impact is talking about a change in behavior, knowledge, attitude, condition. And usually when you do an impact story, you need to have an impact to talk about. So if you're just talking about a program that you have planned that you're going to work on, that's kind of a different story that you're telling. And so when you do an impact story, you want to make sure there is an actual impact to talk about. So then when you're talking about your evaluation data, what you're going to do is, and this is how we do it at Extension. This is just the model that we use. It's what our national land grant organization at the USDA. This is what they ask us to do when we report. So the first thing is to talk through. So this is kind of like a step-by-step of how you would write a story based on an evaluation. The first thing is relevance in Wisconsin. At Extension, we say situation. So we have people describe the situation. So that would be like a community needs assessment. Um, we we know that so many people are socially isolated, and it's a problem in Wisconsin because of the weather, or you would just draw out the situation. This is what's happening. This is what we see right now. Then you would talk about your response. So because of that, we developed this program. We did this. We had a class. You would just describe what you did in response to that. And then you would talk about your evaluation data. And because of our program, we found that 30% of people improved isolation by being less isolated. I guess I don't know how you'd say that, but you would talk about your results. So that would be a typical, any of you guys would do a program report that way, right? One step further then would be what the impact would be of those changes. So they made the changes, but the impact would be more of how those, you would just take it a step further and talk about how those changes changed their life, maybe, or changed their attitude, or how those behavior changes made a bigger impact for them. So that is sort of the steps that we do. Another way to think about impact or taking it that step further is to, we call it a public value statement, but you had these results. So why does anyone care about those? So this sounds kind of bad, but you'll hear people in our office say, why do I care? And so you want to answer that with that impact statement or that public value statement of just, we care as a society because we don't want people to be lonely, or loneliness can lead to other issues. We want people to feel like they have a sense of belonging, that they're thriving in our community, those kinds of things. You would just take it that step further and connect it to the bigger community picture. And so basically when you're doing this, so the story part, so that's like the 4 steps that we do, the outline of the story. The story actually comes in when you pick a person to talk about. And so you're going to take those 4 things that you of your evaluation, the response, the results, the impact, and you're going to find someone that an anecdote, somebody that went through those things with you and that is willing to talk about it. And then you're going to interview them and say, what is your situation? What is your personal situation? Why did you feel like you needed to participate in our program? What was that program like for you? What did you do in that program? And then tell us about the changes that you experienced after doing the program or the intervention. And so you're going to take that, and that's going to be your anecdote. And the way I usually do it is I start out with the anecdote. Like, this person, was struggling with loneliness. They weren't sure what to do. Someone recommended our class. They took the class, and based on the class, now they know how to connect to their neighbors, or they learned skills for connecting to their neighbors. And then I take that one anecdote, because obviously people don't fund you for one person to change one person's lives typically. So I take that one anecdote now that people understand what we're talking about. And I say, and that they're not the only person in their community that is lonely. We know that. And then you kind of expand it out to, we know that this many people are actually lonely. We know that there's a need for these services. We've provided those services. This is the results. We know that this is a great program. We want to do more of this programming. And this is going to change our community because people are going to start thriving and participate more in civic engagement and whatever you're working on. Okay, so when you're helping other people, when you're trying to pick your story, your like case study or your example, you're talking about, what is the person's problem? How did your solution change their life? Why does the problem and solution matter in the bigger scope of things? And that's it. Okay. And then this is an important piece. So your audience matters. When you're telling a story, you can really tailor the story to your audience. And like we talked about, ethical storytelling, you obviously don't want to stretch anything, but this is a situation where if you're talking to mental health providers, they are going to care about different things about your program than if you're talking to maybe legislators who have different goals in mind. So a legislator might care more about medical costs that you're saving. I mean, I'm really generalizing there. That's not all they care about, but generally, budgets, things like that. A mental health provider, if you said, well, you're going to save money on your budget, they'd be like, that's not my goal. So you would talk about the mental health benefits of the program. And so it's not that you're, both of those things that might be true, that you're saving money and you're helping mental health. But we all only have a certain amount of attention. So you're kind of filtering through all the benefits and picking the ones that will be most, will connect best with the audience, if that makes sense. So you just need to understand when you're writing your story, what does your audience care about? What are your audience's concerns? And what does your audience want to support? This is especially important if you're fundraising. and telling stories for that reason. You want to make sure you know what they care about, what they want to support, so that you can share stories with them of people that are in that situation to let them know that we, in fact, are doing the thing that you want to support. So choosing your story, we just talked a little bit about that, but um, some things I've found is that we tend to, when we're picking our person to talk about, we tend to say, oh, this person told me they really love our program. I'm going to include them. So before you do that, there's a few things. Make sure that the person that you're going to interview represents your participants. So you think about at Extension, we have a program called FoodWise. That's a nutrition program for people who get SNAP benefits. If I'm telling a story about FoodWise, I'm not going to use someone who does not get SNAP benefits. This sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised when you start telling a story. You're like, oh, nope, that's not a good match. So make sure they represent your participants. If you're talking about Jefferson County, yay, Jefferson County, then you would talk about someone that lives in Jefferson County. If you're talking about the manufacturing industry, you would want to make sure the person lives in the manufacturing industry, okay? You want to make sure the person had the problem you're talking about, that they actually were lonely or socially isolated, and that they're willing to talk about it, because sometimes, especially with loneliness and isolation, they may not be comfortable being in the public eye to talk about what happened. And so you want to make sure that they have struggled with that and can talk about it. That they did the intervention you're talking about. So if you're talking about a course that you developed or a program you developed, you want to make sure that they did it. They did the course and they did it the exact way you're talking about. So we've had situations around COVID where people did in-person classes, and we were talking about the move to virtual classes and how we found that the transition has gone well, or that that we're finding similar results when it's a virtual setting. And then the people that I interviewed did the in-person version, and they did benefit from the program, but it was the in-person version, so it didn't really work for the story about virtual. It's just little details that it sounds really dumb when I'm saying it, but when you're going through it, it seems like people little things come up. All right, and then you want to make sure that they actually had the outcome that you're trying to talk about, so you can explain, hey, this happened to them, and this is the outcome that we want for everybody. And then really important is, again, make sure that the people you're interviewing are willing to talk about their experience and able to talk about their experience and the impact of that outcome. And so that can be, there can be a lot of issues with that with confidentiality. So you guys already know about that. But one thing is that just because someone loved your program doesn't mean they're able to reflect on it and articulate what it was about your program. And you usually want someone that can do that for the story. So I've had people that were like, I loved the program. It was great. Loved it. What did you love about it? I mean, it was just good. It was good. I just loved it. And then I like keep asking questions and they keep coming back to, I don't know, it felt good to be there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's okay. So not everyone can really articulate aspects that you want them to. So if that happens, just say, great, thank you. And maybe see if you can find someone else that would be able to do that. And when you find someone that can really articulate and reflect on their experience, you'll be like, this is fantastic. I love it. So that's it. That's what I got for you guys. Tell me what questions you have. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you, Dealey. We will take some questions. I'll be monitoring the chat.
Am I still sharing my screen?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks.
Don't see any questions coming in. So everyone must be feeling really good about storytelling. Oh,
Or
here.
they're like experts already, maybe.
Yeah. Sally says we often hear from people with disability that storytelling can be seen as making up a story and they prefer story sharing.
Yeah. Do you mean just the language that you're using, or are you talking about a different process?
So we've done a lot of work around storytelling,
Mhm.
and we work closely with People First Wisconsin. And because people with disabilities, especially when they're reporting abuse or neglect, are often not believed. And so they have asked us in some of the storytelling that we've been doing to change it to use story sharing,
Okay.
because that has a different connotation and that it's not something that's made up. So we have been trying to move to, because obviously that's what the language we've used for many years. So
Yeah.
we've tried to use more to this story sharing, and then educating other people about that, just due to their concerns about not being believed.
Okay. I really like that, Sally. I actually might start using that myself because when I started doing storytelling, it does feel like storytelling is either fiction or it's when someone's lying, right? You're like, oh, you're telling a story. So I really appreciate that change in language. That's good.
Great. Dan says, how do you find out what story will be most effective with a given audience?
That is the big question, Dan. I'm going to be honest. I think for us, we just keep we rely a lot on our leadership. They kind of have a pretty good handle on what people are interested in and what trends are happening, and so they'll identify things or things that we need to talk about um, in society at a certain time or season. Um, so there's that. But as far as what messaging is effective, that's just something trial and error. You just have to look at your if you're telling a story on social media, you just have to look at what gets more engagement, what seems to work. And that's just kind of a long game of just following that and knowing your audience. There's not, um, yeah, I don't have a great answer for that. Sometimes you tell a story and you just are like, yeah, that landed. And hopefully you tell a few so you can kind of get ideas from each, and evaluate your stories. But yeah. Sometimes we've had very random topics that I thought like I had a story about county clerks on election day, and I'm like, this is going to go crazy. Like everyone's going to be like, yeah, let's talk about county clerks. It was like one of the worst stories that we've ever had. And I have no idea why. I don't know. It was a great story. I don't know. So sometimes it's just, you know, there's so many factors. Sometimes people just are sick of social media. They're sick of reading stories. They shut down all channels of communication. You can't really adjust for that. And that doesn't mean the story's not an effective message. It just means there's other things happening. So that was not a very helpful answer. Sorry, Dan.
What are the finished formats you use?
That's a great question. Um, so we do stories. We publish them on our news site first, and then I've been working really hard on figuring out how to take that news URL, and figure out how to get it in more hands, put on social media, just different ways that you can get that one. You spend a lot of time writing a story, so how can you amplify that story and get it in front of more people? So some of that's partnerships. So if I do a story on, say, farm succession or something like that, um, I'll want to connect with all our partners that we work with that are not extension partners, and just let them know that that story was out there. A lot of times they'll share it with their audiences, um, and so the reason I'm saying that is because then a lot of times I'll put together like a toolkit with images and blurbs that people can use really easily. So that's another finished format. We have not done a lot of video. It's expensive and we don't have the expertise in-house. And so to hire someone, it's pretty expensive. So we've kind of been figuring out when we want to spend money on a video and when do we not. There's in, people want to do videos for everything. It's really not a good use of time necessarily because you don't necessarily get lot of um, a lot more engagement from a video versus print. And then we don't actually print very much of our stories because of the format. It's just something you would read like a blog or a story. And so the things that we print are usually more like a report format. So we haven't really printed stories so much. I don't know if that was helpful, Karen. You can let me know if you have more questions.
And Michelle says, how much of it gets dismissed and lost due to telling your story?
Yeah, I worry about that, but I think the more you do storytelling or story sharing, the more you can find, like, there's an art to it. So when you're telling someone's story, there's a way to know your messaging, your main message, and to bring that into what they're saying and use the quotes that they're using to get that message across. So it takes a lot of skill to be able to do that, but you can definitely get the story across through the story. You can definitely get the messaging across through the story if you really work at it. Um, but you're definitely not getting as much information across. I mean, you have to really limit, you have to be targeted about your messages. You pick maybe 2 or 3 things you want to get across in the story because of that, you're going to tell more story than facts. So that's definitely a trade-off, but I guess people read them more and they understand more. So it's probably worth the trade-off.
Mhm. Great. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, here's one more. Do you tend to share quotes anonymously? We tend to give vague identifiers like community member, but I worry that doesn't have enough validity.
Yeah, when I use quotes, I'm usually telling the person's story, and I do not do that anonymously. However, we've had a few situations where it was the situation was way too fragile, or just we were worried about what, if there would be backlash or something. And so in that situation, I would always protect the person over the story. So then I might do it anonymously. But even in that, I think I would try to identify as much as possible so they don't think it's just me making up a quote. Um, so it might, instead of saying community member, I might say a person that lives in, a different town, and then describe that area which is, known for blah, 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 to kind of give it a little more sense of that it is a person. But we haven't really had to do anonymous quotes yet. But there are definitely situations we've written things about, or we've started to write things and had to stop. But um, about um, the justice system, people who are released from prison, and there's been just a lot of questions about re-victimizing their victim if we talk about certain things, and so being careful about that. And so in that situation, we were going to talk anonymously because we really did want to capture the changes that they made during their time and the programs that they went through, but we also didn't want the person that they had hurt before they went in to feel like, that we were saying, oh, this person's so great, when, they had caused trauma. So I'm probably not using the right words, so sorry if I'm being disrespectful, but so that would be a time when we would speak anonymously. Well, and also because you don't necessarily want the whole community to know about someone who's not ready, who's just left the prison system and is trying to rehome in their community. They may not want everyone to know who they are. So there are times when it's definitely important. Right now, I mean, immigrants, we would definitely not share their names. We would talk about them anonymously.
Somebody asked about using first name, last initial for testimonials.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. I think even just having the last name is helpful. It's more of just the reader, will they feel like you're making up the quote, or will they really feel like it's a person? And so you could definitely do that, a first name, or first name and last initial. But yeah, definitely. Although my name, Deely, that would not protect me. So it doesn't always work, but yeah. Great questions, you guys.
Yeah.
Well, feel free if you want to send me an email if you have follow-up questions. I'm happy to email back.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Delia. This has been really great. Well, we will wrap up today with any announcements and just an overall wrap up. So again, Suzanne wasn't able to be here today, but if anyone is interested in being part of the coalition itself and an active member, Please feel free to reach out to Suzanne, and her email address is shown on the screen here. And then our next meeting will be on April 15th from 2 to 3 p.m. Thank you everyone for attending today, especially to Delia as our presenter.